Hello and welcome to the Shelf Life, End of Life, Shelf Space webinar. This presentation is a second in a series of webinars that were presented by 4R Systems Client Delivery Team. My name is Mark Garland and I'm the Executive Vice President of Sales, Marketing and Solutions here at 4R, and I will be helping to facilitate and monitor today's session. Just by way of update, this webinar will be recorded and will be available post this event on our website. Also, a little note before we get started. All of the phone lines are on mute at the moment and will remain muted throughout the presentation. We will take questions via the chat feature, which you will find on the right-hand side of your screen throughout the webinar. What we will do is take time at the end to answer as many questions as we possibly can with the available amount of time that we'll have post the webinar. So what I'd like to do now is introduce you to our presenter, Sarah Kagan-Vega, Associate Client Manager of 4R. Sarah?
Thank you, Mark. Hi, I'm Sarah Kagan-Vega. Today we'll be discussing how 4R maximizes profits while balancing the inventory challenges of shelf life, end of life, and shelf space. 4R's algorithm allows for these item constraints to be taken into consideration when calculating the profit optimal inventory position, or our 4R reorder point. The hard guesswork is eliminated, allowing for maximum profit, minimized spoilage, reduced backstock clutter, and also allows for a better customer shopping experience. Let's take a closer look at all three features. The first feature, shelf life support, is used for perishable items with an expiration date or known shelf life. The second feature, end of life support, is available for when a SKU will be removed from a selling location at a known future date. It can also be used for entire store closures. And lastly, shelf space support can be used when the amount of available space on a shelf for an item is limited. For shelf life support, 4R's algorithm considers a product's shelf life when determining the profit optimal reorder point. An expiration cost, known as an obsolescence penalty, will be applied for these items with a limited shelf life. This cost is the cost the retailer incurs once a product has reached its expiration and is equal to a percentage of the product cost. The shelf life feature can be used by retailers to minimize loss due to spoilage. The reorder point will be taken into consideration and will take into consideration the short shelf life for perishable items, such as milk or eggs. Inventory levels will be set in a manner that will allow for enough product in store for customers to buy what they need, while also reducing the cost to discard the expired product. 4R requires 3 input parameters from the retailer to allow for shelf life support to be applied. The first is the shelf life start, and this is a flag specifying when the shelf life begins, and it can either be set when the order is placed or when the order is received at the store. The second, shelf life days, is the length of time from when shelf life starts until the product expires. And the third parameter is the obsolescence penalty, and this is the cost penalty applied to inventory remaining after the product has expired. It's expressed as a percentage of the wholesale cost. So for example, if a product has to be completely thrown away after the expiration without recouping any value, the obsolescence penalty would be 1 or 100%. This chart depicts how varying shelf life weeks may affect the 4R reorder point. The chart has shelf life weeks along the x-axis and the reorder point value along the y-axis. In this example, we assume a 100% obsolescence penalty, so the product must be thrown away once shelf life is met, and there is a demand rate of 5 units a week. A shelf life of 10 or more weeks is equivalent to not having a shelf life because there is a low chance of that 25th unit going unsold for 11 weeks. So the shorter the shelf life, the lower the reorder point will be. This next chart indicates the impact on the 4R reorder point as the obsolescence penalty increases. There is an assumed shelf life of 4 weeks and a demand rate of 5 units a week in this example. As the obsolescence penalty increases, the reorder point decreases. Once the obsolescence penalty reaches 80%, the reorder point stops decreasing because at the lower reorder point level, there is less risk of obsolete inventory, leaving minimal remaining excess inventory to penalize and further reduce the 4R reorder point. The next feature is end of life. For this logic, 4R's algorithm will consider the end of life date for when an item will no longer be carried in a store, or it can be used in the event a store is closing. When an end of life date is known, the reorder points will taper down as that date is approached. This feature helps retailers with their inventory levels by having the product gradually decrease in a way that allows for enough product on shelf to capture sales while also taking into consideration the goal in the end to have no inventory left on shelf at that end of life date. At the end of life, we want to minimize the amount of inventory that needs to be marked down or disposed of. Two input parameters are required in order to apply end of life support. The first one is the end of life date, and that's the date in which the item will be discontinued and removed from the shelf. And the second parameter is the obsolescence penalty, and that will be applied in a similar fashion as to that of the shelf life, as it specifies the cost penalty applied to the inventory remaining after that end of life date. This chart demonstrates how the reorder point will be impacted as the item approaches its end of life date. For this example, there's a 100% obsolescence penalty and demand is 5 units a week. At 5 weeks until end of life, due to a 1-week lead time, once the product arrives at the store, it has 4 weeks until the end of life to sell down. So once the weeks until end of life falls within that lead time period, the reorder point falls to a 0 as the product can no longer arrive in store in time to service demand. The following chart displays the impact on the 4R reorder point as the obsolescence penalty increases. Here, there's an assumed 5 weeks until end of life, and there's a demand rate of 5 units a week. Once the obsolescence penalty reaches 80%, the reorder point stops decreasing because at the lower reorder point level, there's less risk of obsolete inventory, leaving minimal remaining excess inventory to penalize and further reduce the 4R reorder point. Shelf life can be applied at several levels. It can be applied at the chain level for all SKU stores, at the SKU chain level for all stores, or at the SKU store level. And shelf life and end of life can coexist for a SKU store. If they do coexist, the earlier of the two constraints will be applied. The third feature is shelf space logic, and this can be utilized to support SKU stores which have limited shelf space. A shelf unit limit and an excess inventory penalty are applied when calculating the 4R profit optimal reorder point. For this example, this feature can work well in managing large or bulky products. If those products do not fit on shelf at time of arrival, there may be no other available backroom space to store them, or for small products that if they don't get on the shelf immediately have the potential to get lost in a backroom. Two input parameters are required for shelf space support: the shelf space units, or maximum number of units of an item that can be placed on the shelf at a location, and the excess inventory penalty. The excess inventory penalty parameter is a penalty on the portion of expected sales that would result from inventory in excess of shelf space units. This chart demonstrates the effect of the excess inventory penalty on the reorder point. As the penalty increases, the reorder points taper down. The graph has an example of a shelf space setting of 2 units and a shelf space of 10 units. The difference in the reorder points for the two settings gets larger as the penalty increases. In this next graph, as we increase the shelf space, the reorder points also increase. As there is more shelf space available, the excess inventory penalty has less of an impact. Once shelf space equals or exceeds the reorder point, the penalty is no longer relevant. 4R's algorithm allows for these item constraints to be taken into consideration when calculating the profit optimal reorder points. Retailers will benefit by having the hard work eliminated of knowing how much inventory to stock. Inventory levels will be efficiently and effectively managed while achieving an optimal profit, minimizing spoilage, reducing backstock and in-aisle clutter, and will allow for a better customer shopping experience. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. What we'd like to do now is open up for questions. And by doing so, we're going to keep the lines muted, but there's a chat box to the right of the webinar on GoToWebinar. If you have any questions, just post those there, and I will pose those to Sarah, and we'll try and answer as many questions as we possibly can. So I'll just kind of pause for a minute. Any questions, please do post them in the chat room. Okay, couple of sort of initial points from sort of the data that you need to drive these, particularly the shelf space. Obviously, the end of life and the shelf life. Do you find that it's fairly easy to access that type of data from most of the retailers that you work with?
Yes, that data seems to be readily available from our retailers. They can either work with their vendors to get that data, or they'll already have it in their databases. It's just figuring out where that data is stored and getting it over to us.
And that is typically the data from the planogramming, from the sort of the shelf space
Correct.
Management solution?
Yes, for the shelf space, that would be planogram information.
Okay, excellent. Just another couple, I think, that are coming through here as well. You talk about all three sort of components, so the shelf life, end of life, and also shelf space. Do all three of those work together? So you can have a product that has a shelf life constraint, but also, sorry, a shelf space constraint, but also has the shelf life. You know, that at some point it'll be sort of violates the end of sort of its shelf life date.
Yes, we can have those parameters work together as needed.
Excellent. Okay, another one that's come through here. Could the end of life date be removed if an item was going to be reinstated and reorder points resume?
Yes, absolutely. We can remove that end of life date. We would just need to receive it in the input files, and it would go back to business as usual for that item. Okay,
excellent. Just any other questions out there from the audience? Please do post those. Again, we'll just hang on for a couple of 10 to 15 seconds to see if there's any further questions. Okay. If any of you think of anything outside of this webinar, we can certainly, this will be posted on the website, and we will also be more than open to answering any further questions directly with you later. In fact, as I'm saying that, we've got another question here. So does the removal of the end of life date affect the seasonal profiles?
This would not affect the seasonal profiles. We would continue to use the historical selling for the seasonal profiles.
Okay. Again, I'll just ask, because I know as I kind of conclude, we might get another question, but any further questions? And as I say, if there are any specific questions that you want to do on a follow-up, feel free to reach out to your client manager or to anybody here in 4R, and we'll certainly get those questions answered for you. So what I'd like to do is thank you, Sarah, for taking some time out of your day. Thank you to all of you also for attending today's webinar. We will have another one coming up in September, which is through our client delivery team, and also some future ones coming up around our analytics, as well as something coming up in later in September as well around our assortment optimization, all of which will be posted to our website, and of which you'll see the link there, 4rsystems.com/webinars. You can see the full schedule, as well as those that we have done in the past and recorded, so you can share the links or go and refresh your memory, etc. So I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for joining, and look forward to having you all join on a future 4R Systems educating retailers to become more profitable. Thank you.